The Buu Arc of Dragon Ball has many complaints levied against it. It's far from as solid as many of the arcs that came before it, with such obvious plot holes as 4 people being able to enter the Room of Spirit and Time that required several retcons to pave over in later material, or how the middle portion of the arc, known by those that watch the dub as the Fusion Saga, has a very repetitive structure, and its version of Buu is probably the most generic of the Buus in personality. Though I'd say most of the common complaints against it range from unjustified when you apply little thought and context, to just plain silly. It's one group of these common complaints that not only lacks strong rationale, but is in fact one of the arc's crowning achievements, being its climax and the manga's conclusion. To get right into things, the climactic battle of Goku and Vegeta against Buu's pure form provides one of the arc's simultaneously most common criticisms and most common misunderstandings. Many question why Goku returned to be in the driving force, with how Gohan and Gotenks had been set up, or say that Goku, being the one to defeat Buu, goes against the themes of the arc. Firstly, he didn't defeat Buu, but more on that later. I find a lot of this mindset stems from 2 things, being people forgetting that thematic content can have polarizing aspects when exploring something in a narrative, as is the case here, as well as ignoring another part of Toriyama's writing style. Let's start with that first point on the arc's theme of focusing on Next Generation and Goku passing the torch. This is only really true if talking about the first part of it, as it's once Gotenks appears in the plot that we see a rebuttal to this idea in an internally coherent way. Going back further to the Cell arc and Goku placing Earth's fate in Gohan's hands, people seem to overlook how Gohan's victory came about from Goku's efforts, with Gohan's mistake costing Goku his life and escalating the threat of Cell. Piccolo also spells out to Goku and the audience that Gohan doesn't think in the manner his father does, and we see this in the Buu arc, as a world seemingly lacking any more major threats cropping up has caused Gohan to relax and focus on studies as he wishes to, with him lacking the drive to improve himself. Anyone aware of how Shugyo and Taoist cultivation ideas are ingrained into the series narrative will understand where Toriyama's thought that someone as reactionary as Gohan wasn't able to carry the story as its protagonist came from. It makes sense why, as, at the same point in the story that Gohan reaches his pinnacle of ki within the manga's original continuity, so too does his character flaws of arrogance and incompetence rise to a new level. Is it bad he made the same mistake as against Cell? Yes, in terms of the action, but it makes sense in character consistency with how far removed he'd been from his fighting instincts for so long. Speaking of Cell, the idea that Gohan should have been the one to defeat Buu ignores that this would have been retreading the same ideas as the climax of the Cell arc, but with nothing to add to the idea and therefore be redundant, just like a certain Dragon Ball Super movie. But what about Gotenks? There is more thematic and narrative justification for him to take the limelight compared to Gohan, due to not only being a character more directly tied to this arc's imagery, but with Goku's approval of Goten and Trunks displaying both the talent to surpass the previous generation and having the desire to compete and improve themselves Gohan was lacking. When you look at everything the pair do, both individually and fused though, that Goku didn't witness when he made his decision, one can see the flaw of this decision. Both Goten and Trunks are very immature and lack someone to discipline them in a way someone such as Kame Sennin or Mr. Popo did for Goku, for him to hone his character as much as his ki. Gotenks' comedic antics, even during the most dire of scenarios, showcase this, with him lacking the anger or drive to protect that Goku and even Gohan had from their experiences, with both Gotenks and Gohan representing halves of the incomplete whole necessary for Goku's successor. It makes sense from a narrative, thematic and character perspective that the one who has an enjoyment for fighting, the self-improvement mindset of Shugyo, and the ability to get serious when necessary, once more takes the responsibility of facing the major opponent. This much is even spelt out by Vegeta in his monologue when the fight between Goku and Buu starts, as not only does this serve as a triumphant conclusion to Vegeta's character arc, but also reminds the audience that Goku's desire to fight purely to test his limits is what separates Goku from all those around him. Alongside this, People tend to forget that a major part of Toriyama's style is to go against expectations, but in an internally coherent manner. This was his main reason for having Goku lose the Tenkaichi Budokai final twice in a row, or with such character decisions as an ancient Sennin being a dirty old man. It's not as though the Majin Boo Arc is a stranger to this either, where many of its prior plot points focus on going against preconceptions as a running trend. The ancient, destructive Majin Buu has a goofy appearance and childish personality. The Zetor sword, built up as a cliché special weapon, to the point Gohan even calls out its lack of originality, is made useless with its true use only coming about once it's broken. And, in this case, the premise of the next generation's potential is challenged, with their flawed personalities requiring Goku's guidance. As the fight progresses and revelations on Super Saiyan 3's flaw come to light that had been established to a lesser extent earlier, Goku is forced to rely on Vegeta and the innocent Majin Buu to fight against Pure Buu as he prepares the Super Genki Dama. This is where the idea of Goku being forced into being the hero to save the day falls apart. Goku only beat Pure Buu in the sense of making the last push with the Genki Dama, which required the distractions of Vegeta, Innocent Buu, and Mr. Satan. Satan convincing all of the people of Earth to donate their Genki to the Genki Dama, along with those on Namek and at the Afterlife's check-in station doing so on Goku's request, and, when that wasn't enough, the Dragon Balls being the nail in the coffin to give Goku the strength needed to make the final push. Those who say Goku was hogging all the glory clearly glossed over the events leading up to the climax, when this was easily the biggest team effort within the series' original run in terms of the amount of characters involved, and the way it brings things together with cameos from many characters throughout the long story, and the titular Dragon Balls providing the final necessary push, make it apparent how Toriyama wanted to end things here, and why everything else since then has been milking, even if some aspects of GT has good ideas. Though the idea of the Dragon Balls providing a quick fix in itself is egregious, it's excusable here not only for their utilisation against the last major threat being poignant, but the stakes the arc provides along with that. It's established when Vegeta has yet to be revived that one whose soul dies when they are already dead physically will cease to exist entirely, and Buu having acquired Kaikai prior, and even following the remaining fighters to the Kaioshinkai, make it apparent he threatens the entire macrocosm, afterlife and all. On the subject of revivals, the wish to exclude evil people from the wish to revive those slain since the Tenkaichi Budokai, such as Dabura, gives the wish a Judgment Day aspect to some extent, as I've mentioned before, in only those considered good enough being brought back and Earth being cleansed of those extreme enough to be considered evil. Also, I'll sidetrack for a moment to clarify a common misconception Pure Buu contesting the Genki Dama being due to those of a pure heart being able to push it back, which is purely a double line. Goku's line to Gohan in the Saiyan arc was that he could push it back if he did not have a Aku no Ki, or evil ki, and people overlooked that it was against an opponent weaker than the attack itself there. Here, Buu is only shown stopping its advance much as Frieza did momentarily on Namek, and Goku not having the strength to guide it properly is what makes this occur. Goku's words before offering the final push to destroy Buu provide a lot of insight into how he views the situation. He doesn't consider it a victory in having to rely on the strength of others rather than himself to defeat Buu, much as it was against Vegeta in their first encounter. On top of that, his line on Buu doing so well all by himself suggests Goku sees some of himself in Buu, as, despite relying on help here, there was still not a single individual capable of shouldering the burden in the manner Goku does. It's here where we can see the varied reasons as to Goku's desire for Buu to be reincarnated as Oob as we move into the ending. Though I've mentioned several aspects which make it understandable Toriyama wished to continue no further than this arc, the question of where Dragon Ball should have ended is so contentious due to the nature of its narrative. Though there are decent points for wishing to end things at the Frieza or Cell arcs, there are negative trade-offs that would come with it, such as some character arcs not being fully realised. What stands out as a point for continuing to the end of this arc as the conclusion is that Dragon Ball being rooted in the Taoist cultivation idea that there is always a greater plateau to reach makes it a story that is never ending so long as Toriyama has the creativity to keep it going, not even going to take such an easy shot at its current state. Combined with that, the Dragon Ball manga is ultimately the story of Son Goku and his Shugyo journey, which would mean an ending for it would have to both provide a fitting conclusion to what is by design a never-ending goal, and a satisfying end to Goku's character arc. And we can see how this is done by looking back at the events of the arc. It's often overlooked how many elements of the arc bring Dragon Ball back to its roots, such as a return to more comedic tones, the imagery of a young Goku, focus on Eastern fantasy and spirituality more so than Western-inspired sci-fi, or several plot points drawn back to older ideas in a manner similar to a greatest hits compilation. With this return to the beginning in several ways, it makes sense that the penultimate and final chapters bring things full circle for Goku. What started as a boy whose world and ideals centered upon memories of his grandfather has become a grandfather to someone with the similar drive to improve he has, and with more discipline than Goten or Trunks. However, Goku had learned from his battle with Cell as well as from Buu that forcing the responsibility onto someone who lacked the right experience or mindset would be the incorrect approach, and therefore sticks with his choice of preparing Oob to be the successor rather than Pan. Goku sees from their fight that Oob can muster up anger and bring about great strength, and confirms later that he has the same desire to fight and improve as he does. He has not only found the right successor to the task of defending Earth against those that directly threaten what he cares for, but the perfect ideological mirror for a friendly opponent. With the major Eastern beliefs of Taoism and Buddhism being central aspects in constructing Dragon Ball's narrative, it makes sense Goku leaves his family to tutor Oob and bring his Shugyo full circle, similar to how the Buddha abandoned his family to attain Nirvana. That and most of his family have grown to be independent of him, and it only makes sense for him to not detach Oob from his own family. For an ending so disregarded as unfulfilling by a fair portion of the fanbase, it's astounding how well it concludes the narrative to what could have easily been a perpetual story in a manner that brings things full circle, especially with the Kanzenban release making this even more transparent, with Goku gifting Oob the Kinto-Un. Let's just ignore the backtracking this version does to Vegeta's character arc though. I guess this says more about the mindset of the fan base than the quality of the series. With that, we bring a fitting conclusion to the end of this analysis series run. Thank you if you have watched all the previous parts. It will be a while before I do more Dragon Ball related content, other than maybe things to do with the upcoming Tenkaichi game, or perhaps even perform the same task with GT's arcs if there's enough demand. If you have a Dragon Ball related topic for a future video, do feel free to add a request in the comments, and I may do so in the future.